What's up, everyone? How you doing? And welcome to our channel where we are here to make math easy. History. Alright, so what's on the docket, Mr. B? Some slipping Holshins. What language is that? It's math. Okay, yeah, we're gonna teach you how to subtract fractions and give you a couple of tips to make it super easy. Yeah, look for the challenge problem that we're gonna put in the lesson. And once you have your answer, put it in the comments section and we'll see how many of you can get it right. All right, so without further ado, let's get started. All right, so let's get started in subtracting fractions. So first, let's start with a problem. So let's say we have 3/5 and we're going to subtract that by 1/3. Now, if you've done any fractions before, you know if we're adding or subtracting fractions, we need to have a common denominator. So that's the first thing we need to do. Now in this problem, we do not have a common denominator. Both denominators are different, right? So I'm gonna look at this, I'm gonna try to figure out how I can come up with a common denominator. So the first thing we wanna do is we want to try to come up with the least common denominator. We're gonna come up with the least common denominator, or the LCD. Oh, I have a LCD right here. I'm sure this would probably help you in all of your mathematical operations. Here you go. Is this a CD cut in the shape of an L? Why, yes it is. Isn't that what you're talking about? Not quite, but I'll keep that there for reference. All right, so when you are thinking of the LCD, the least common denominator, think of this L-shaped CD. Very, very nice. All right, so least common denominator. In order to do this, we need to know the multiples of our two denominators. So I'm going to write them just like this. All right, so 3 and 5. I always start with the smaller one, and I do like the first 5 of them. And then from there, I look at the larger one and then see which one's common. So let's just come up with multiple 3's. Multiple is more than one. So 1 3 is 3. 2 3's, or 2 times 3 is 6. 3 3's, or 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times 4 is 12. 3 times 5 is 15. And so we got our first 4. Let's do one more just in case. 3 times 6 is 18. All right, so now we have our multiples of 3. Now let's go to our 5, our larger of the two denominators. And let's try to list as many multiples as we can until we find one that's common with 1 for 3. All right, so 2 5's is 10. 3 5's is 15. And right there, I notice I'm gonna stop. And I'm going to look. 15 is a common denominator. It's the least, it's the smallest number we can make that both of these can turn into. All right, so let's get rid of this stuff because it's kind of crowding our space a little bit. And then from there, we're going to rewrite the problem and then come up with a common denominator 15 for both of our fractions. All right, so let's do this problem. So I'm going to write our two fractions. 3/5 minus, and don't forget which operation we're doing. That's probably one of the common things people do. And we're going to rewrite our fractions with a denominator of 15. So I'm going to rewrite 1/3 right here and 3/5 right here. Make sure I still have subtraction. okay? So now I want to start with our denominator. So 3 times what is 15? Well, 3 times 5 is 15. So whatever I do to this denominator, I have to do to that numerator. So I'm going to multiply that numerator by 5. 1 times 5 is 5. Then up here for this fraction, this is going to be separate. Ignore this bottom one. 5 times what is 15? Well, 5 times 3. Ironic that it's opposite of this one. 5 times 3 is 15, so whatever I do to that denominator, I have to do to that numerator. 3 times 3 is 9. All right, so now we can subtract these two fractions because they have the same denominator. So our denominators stay the same. However, our numerators, we're going to subtract. 9 minus 5 is 4. So our answer is 4/15. Now we always want to make sure that when we're looking at this, we see if there is a way of simplifying. Put in simplest form. I always choose the smaller of the two numbers and think of what numbers go into that. So what numbers go into 4? Well, 1, 2, and 4. Those are the factors of 4, the numbers we can use to multiply to get 4. Now, are any of these factors of 15? Can we divide divide by 1? Yeah, but still 15. Can we divide 15 by 2? No, because this is an odd number. Can we divide 15 by 4? No, that will not work either. So this is in simplest form. So we are all set. All right, let's get rid of this, all right, and start over again. All right, now we're gonna do another one, all right? And remember, don't forget LCD, LCD, all right? And so let's do the problem 1/2 minus 1/6. Now, I'm gonna show you another trick on this one. Now, we can do the same process like we were doing before, except there's gonna be one thing that's gonna be a little bit different. On some of them, we're gonna have to change both denominators. Others, we won't have to change both. And this makes it a little bit less work. Mathematicians love to make less work, all right? And we love to make it so that we don't have to rename both of these fractions. Renaming is basically just coming up with new numbers, all right? Well, I like to name this one Fred and that one Priscilla. Yeah, we're not that type of renaming. All right, so we're gonna rename by coming up with the same denominator. Now, here's one trick I want you to think about. Before, we changed both denominators by coming up with the least common denominator. We listed out the multiples for both numbers. Now, that will work for every single one. So you don't have to worry about it. So this is going to work sometimes, okay? But it'll save you work. So here's the first tip. When you have two denominators, look at the denominators and look at the smaller one. Can you make the smaller one into the larger one? So is there something we can multiply 2 to get 6? Yes, there is. 2 times 3 is 6. So in this case, now we're gonna have a common denominator of 6, but we only have to change one of our fractions. So I'm just gonna write 1/6 again right here because we don't need to change it. And then whatever I do to our denominator, I'm gonna do to our numerator. 1 times 3 is 3. So now I've renamed 1/2 to 3/6. These are
equivalent.
Equivalent means equal, right? So they mean the same thing. So now I'm going to subtract. We have 3/6 minus 1/6. And when subtracting or adding fractions, as long as the denominator is the same, that's how many parts make a whole. So we're not going to be subtracting 6 minus 6. It's still out of 6 parts. So that's still our denominator. But now we're looking at our numerators. We're going to take 3 and subtract 1, and we get 2. All right, now that was a lot fewer steps because we didn't have to come up with, our multiples of both denominators, come up with our least common denominator, right? It was a lot less work, all right? However, the last step we always need to do is we need to put in simplest form. We need to look, can we simplify 2/6? And in order to do that, we need to look at, I always choose the smaller of the two numbers. So 2 is a smaller number. All right, so for 2, what are the factors of 2? Factors are just the numbers that you use to multiply to get that. So 1 times 2, so 1 and 2 are factors of 2. Now, is there anything else? No, I can't think of anything else. So in this case, I know I can divide 2 by 1 and 2 by 2. Can I do the same thing down here? Whenever you have 1 as a factor, pretty much ignore it. Because when we have 1 as a factor, if we divide 6 by 1, we get 6. And that's pointless. It didn't do anything. So let's try dividing by 2. Can we take 6 and divide it by 2? Yes, we can. 6 divided by 2 is equal to 3. Now when we're simplifying, we have to divide both the top and the bottom, the numerator and the denominator, by that same number. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So that means we now have an answer right here, which is 1/3. Don't assume that it's completely simplified yet. Let's look again. What are the factors of 1? Well, it's 1. Now, does 1 go into 3? Yes, but if we divide 3 by 1, we still get 3, so it's really not going to make a difference. So here's a little tip too. All right, so when you have a 1 in the numerator, your fraction is simplified. All right, there's no way of simplifying it if you have a 1 in the numerator, because there's no numbers we can use, no factors besides 1 for 1. All right, it's a special number in that way. So this is our answer, 1/3. All right, so that's tip number 1. Let's try another one with a different tip. All right, so final tip, tip number 3. This one is pretty straightforward. This is the one that's going to work for every problem. So if the first couple tips kind of confuse you a little bit, this one is going to work no matter which subtraction of fractions problem you have. Okay, so make sure you do this. All right, so let's do the problem, I don't know, 5/8, and let's subtract 1/4. Now, in every problem, what will work is if you need a common denominator, say you're having trouble coming up with maybe the multiples for each one of these numbers to come up with the least common denominator. You can't come up with them. Maybe you still need to brush up on your multiplication facts. One thing that will always work, multiply the two denominators together to get a common denominator. Because what you're doing here is you're multiplying 8 times 4 and getting a number, and then you're multiplying 4 times 8 and getting that same number. All right, so let's try it here. So when we multiply 8 times 4, think of it this way, 8 times 2 is 16, so 8 times 2 twice, 16 plus 16, and that's 32. So our denominator is going to be 32. Now how do we get 32 from 8? We multiplied it by 4. Whenever we do to the denominator, we have to do to the numerator. 5 times 4 is 20. Now down here, what did we multiply 4 by to get 32? Well, we multiplied 4 by 8. All right, see how we're using both denominators to come up with something that's common. Now, whatever we have to multiply our denominator here by, we have to do to our numerator. 1 times 8 is 8. So now we have a common denominator. So our denominators will stay the same in our answer because that's how many parts make a whole. And then we subtract our numerators. 20 minus 8 is 12. Now we're not done. Why? We have to come up with the simplest form. So 12/32. It's pretty small, but I will look at our fraction and I will ask myself which one's the smaller of the two numbers. 12 is. And I'm going to come up with the factors for 12. So the factors for 12 are 1 times 12. I know 2 times 6. I know 3 times 4, right? All of those are factors of 12. So I can't really think of anything else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of these factors and I'm going to see if it divides 32 equally. Now, I am going to kind of cheat a little bit. I know one thing about divisibility rules, which if you haven't seen that, make sure you watch the video on divisibility rules. Divisibility rules means when a number is divided evenly. A number is divided evenly by 2 when the end number is an even number. So I already noticed that this ends in an even number. It ends in 2. So I know 32 will divide evenly into 2 groups. So I'm going to divide 12 and 32 by 2. 12 divided by 2 is 6. Now 32 divided by 2. Well, if I think about this, 2 into 2 groups is 1 and 1, and 30 into 2 groups is 15. All right, so 15 plus 1 is 16. And if we just think about this, 16 plus 16 is 32, so that works. So half, or one of 2 groups of 32 is 16. So 6 out of 16. But we still have to keep going to make sure that we have simplest form. Okay? So we have to think, what are the factors for 6 and 16? So we have to think, what are the factors of 6 or 16? Always choose the smaller of those 2 numbers, right? So 6. I'm just going to get rid of this stuff right here because that's kind of bothering me a little bit. All right? So the factors of 6 are 1 times 6, 2 times 3. That's all I can come up with. So I'm not going to use 1. I could try 6. 6 times what is 16? Well, that doesn't work. How about 2? Well, if you remember that rule from what we just did, any number that ends in an even number is divisible by 2. It can be evenly divided by 2. So 16 divided by 2 and 6 divided by 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 16 divided by 2 is 8. Now you might be thinking,
Hey, Miss Rod, are we done yet? Please?
I want to go to the water park. What water park? No water parks are open right now. You know when the water comes out of the house and it flows out of that green thing that like snakes along? The hose? Yeah, whatever you want to call it. I don't know what its name is, but I like going in that and squirting it directly up my nose. Yeah, who doesn't? All right, so 3/8. We're gonna try this one last time. What are the factors of 3? I'm choosing 3. Why? Say it out loud, even to yourself. You're gonna look a little weird, but that's fine. The factors of 3. I'm choosing that one because it's the smaller of the 2 numbers. That means it's gonna have less factors, which means less work for me to have to do. So the factors of 3 are 1 and 3. Now again, we're not gonna use 1. So I'm gonna look at 3. I'm gonna ask myself, can 8 be divided by 3? No, it can't. 3, 6, 9. Doesn't work. So that means this is our answer. All right, so I went over a couple of different tips. Number one thing is, you can always use this process of multiplying the 2 denominators together to get a common denominator that will work for both. Okay, so always use that trick in case you don't remember anything else. Otherwise, remember the other tricks. All right, the other tips I gave you. 1, look at the bigger of the 2 fractions, or the bigger of the 2 denominators, and think, can I divide it by something to get the other one? Now, only work if you can divide 8 and 5 by the same number. All right, so that's one thing you gotta keep in mind. The other tip was, look at the smaller of the 2 denominators and think, can you multiply that by something to get the larger? In which case, yes, we can. Okay, so that one will sometimes work as well. So basically, when you're subtracting fractions, you need a least common denominator, or just a common denominator. All right, least common denominator just makes less work for you. Okay, and that's pretty much it. fork I use for my lunch?
This is my toothbrush. I use it every day to get nice and deep like into them crevices.
I think I'm gonna be sick.
Maybe my toothbrush will help you feel better. All right, folks. Well, that's all for today. So make sure in the comment section you write down what your favorite smell is. Because I'll be grading which one is the best. And without further ado, that's pretty much the end of our show. So make sure you like and subscribe so you see more of me. And we'll catch you next time. Smell you later.
Thank you.